He brought a Welsh rebel's daughter to his fortress to humble her. But when a storm rages, the only thing that can calm his mother is the enemy's lullaby. The rain fell on Claremont Keep with the persistence of a siege. It was a cold, English rain that turned the earth to mud and the sky to a sheet of lead. Inside the great hall, the air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, wet wool, and roasted meat. At the high table, Lord Bastien de Claremont sat as a king in his stone kingdom, his face a mask of grim satisfaction. His men, a rough collection of knights and men-at-arms, were in a boisterous mood, their laughter echoing off the stark stone walls. The success of the raid had been absolute. They had driven Llywelyn ap Gruffudd from his own hall, sent the rebel prince and his sons scattering into the mist-shrouded mountains like frightened deer. But the true prize, the jewel of this victory, sat silent and rigid beside him. Lady Anwen ferch Llywelyn. She did not look at the trencher of food placed before her. She did not acknowledge the cup of wine. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. She wore the same deep blue gown she had been captured in, now stained from the long, hard ride, but her posture was that of a princess holding court amidst barbarians. Her dark hair, a cascade of unruly curls, was a stark contrast to the severe, neat braids of the Norman ladies. Bastien took a long draught of his wine, the taste bitter on his tongue. He watched her from the corner of his eye. This was no ragged hostage to be thrown in a dungeon. This was a political lever, a living, breathing piece on the chessboard of the marches, and she was his personal trophy, a small measure of vengeance for the father he had lost a decade ago to a Welsh arrow. "You should eat," he said, his voice low, meant only for her. It was the first time he had addressed her directly since their arrival hours before. "Starvation is a poor form of protest. It weakens the body, not the resolve of your captor." Anwen's eyes, the color of forest moss, flickered towards him for a fraction of a second, before fixing on the roaring fire in the hearth. "My body is my own to weaken," she replied in flawless, though accented French. Her tone was like the rain outside, cold and steady. A muscle twitched in Bastien's jaw. "Your body, Lady Anwen, is currently the property of House Claremont. Its well-being is my concern. Eat." She turned her head fully then, and the force of her gaze, filled with a hatred so pure it was almost captivating, struck him. "I am no man's property. I am Anwen ferch Llywelyn. My father is a prince. You are a lord of stolen stone, squatting on land that does not belong to you." A few of his knights nearby fell silent, sensing the tension. Bastien leaned back in his great carved chair, a predator assessing his trapped quarry. "Your father is a rebel who hides in the hills while his daughter dines at his enemy's table. The land belongs to the man strong enough to hold it. That is the only law that matters." He gestured to the food. "Eat, or I will have my physician force a broth down your throat. You will need your strength. You have a duty to perform." This caught her attention. A flicker of fear, quickly masked by defiance. "What duty?" "My mother, the Lady Isabel, is unwell. The Keep's women are inadequate in their care. You will attend to her." Her laugh was a short, sharp, bitter sound. "You wish me to nurse the mother of the man who holds me captive? You have a strange notion of duty, Lord Bastien. And you have a strange notion of your position," he countered, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You are a hostage of high birth. You will be treated with the courtesy your station demands, so long as you behave with the decorum it requires. Part of that decorum is making yourself useful. You will attend my mother. You will speak to her, read to her, provide her with comfort. Is that understood?" He saw the war waging within her, the refusal on her lips, the calculation in her eyes. To refuse was to invite harsher treatment, to be relegated to the status of a common prisoner. To agree was to serve her enemy. "I understand that Norman courtesy is a chain, finely wrought but a chain nonetheless," she said finally, her voice thick with contempt. She picked up a piece of bread, not to eat, but to crush in her hand. "I will see your mother." It was a small victory, but it felt hollow. He had broken her initial defiance, but not her spirit. He could see it burning in her, a banked fire waiting for fuel. He dismissed her with a nod, and a stern-faced matron emerged from the shadows to escort her to the chambers prepared for her. Later, after the hall had quieted and the torches guttered in their sconces, Bastien stood before the narrow, arched window of his solar. The rain had eased to a drizzle, and a sliver of moon cast a sickly light on the Welsh mountains in the distance. They were a dark, brooding presence, a perpetual challenge. His father had died in those green, deceptive valleys. The memory was a cold stone in his gut. A soft cough came from the doorway. It was Sir Gerald, his castellan and most trusted man. "The Lady Anwen is settled in the East Tower chamber, the one with a view of the mountains," Gerald reported, a question in his tone. "Let her look," Bastien said, not turning from the window. "Let her remember what she has lost. It will remind her of her value here. She is spirited?" Gerald ventured. "She is a Welsh wildcat," Bastien corrected, a grim smile touching his lips. "And we have pulled her claws, for now. Her father will treat Gerald. He will have to. He dotes on her. She is the key to bringing that old fox to heel. And if he does not?" Bastien finally turned, his face in shadow, the firelight catching the grim line of his mouth. "Then she remains. A permanent guest, a living reminder of the consequences of defying the crown, and of defying me." He walked to the hearth, placing a hand on the cold stone mantel. "How is my mother?" "The same, my lord. She slept through the commotion. She sleeps most of the time now." A familiar weight settled on Bastien's shoulders. The weight of the marches, the weight of vengeance, the weight of a dying mother. He had built a life of order, of discipline, of stone and steel, to bear these burdens. And now, he had introduced a new, unpredictable element. A princess with fire in her soul and hatred in her eyes. He had thought bringing her here would be a simple act of conquest. But as he stood in the silence of his keep, listening to the distant drip of rain, he felt the first, almost imperceptible crack in the foundations of his world. She was not just a prisoner. She was a storm he had invited inside his walls, and he had no notion of the devastation she would wreak. The chamber they had given her was in the East Tower, a circular room of cold stone. It was not a dungeon. It held a narrow bed with a wool-stuffed mattress, a small table, a chest, and a hearth where a meager fire now struggled for life. The courtesy was, as Bastien had stated, a finer chain. The single narrow window, an arrow slit widened just enough to admit a person's frame, offered a cruel, breathtaking view of the mountains. Her mountains. They were a deep, misty blue in the fading twilight, a sight that tightened her throat with a homesickness so acute it was a physical pain. Anwen stood before it, her cloak still fastened with the bronze brooch her grandmother had given her, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She could still smell the great hall on her clothes, the alien scents of Norman food and Norman smoke. She could still feel the weight of Lord Bastien's gaze, like a physical pressure. A knock came at the door, too soft to be her jailer. Anwen did not turn. "Enter." The woman who entered was the same stern matron who had escorted her. She carried a tray with a hunk of bread, a wedge of hard cheese, and a cup of small beer. She set it on the table with a thud that spoke of disapproval. "You will attend Lady Isabel after you break your fast in the morning," the woman said in stilted French. "I will come for you." Anwen finally turned, her mossy eyes sweeping over the woman's pinched face. "What is your name?" The question seemed to surprise her. "Mistress Agnes." "Thank you, Mistress Agnes," Anwen said, her tone devoid of warmth but perfectly polite. It was a small act of defiance, to maintain her manners when she felt like screaming. Agnes merely sniffed and left, the key turning in the lock with a final, chilling click. Alone again, Anwen ignored the food. Instead, she approached the window, pressing her hands against the cold stone on either side of the slit. The wind whipped a fine, cold spray of rain into her face. Somewhere out there, her father and brothers were planning, regrouping. Were they thinking of her? Or was she now a complication in their rebellion, a pawn they might have to sacrifice? The thought was a shard of ice in her heart. She would not be a pawn. She was Anwen ferch Llywelyn. She would be a thorn in the side of Lord Bastien de Claremont for as long as she was forced to remain within his walls. The night deepened, and with it came the storm. It was not the gentle rain of before, but a true Marcher tempest. The wind howled around the tower like a banshee, rattling the wooden shutter of the window. Thunder grumbled in the distance, rolling closer until it cracked directly overhead, shaking the very stones. Anwen sat on the edge of the bed, her cloak pulled tight around her. She was not afraid of storms. She had been born to them in the mountains, but this was a different kind of fury, trapped and amplified by the stone cage of the keep. It was during a particularly violent clap of thunder that she heard it, a faint, keening cry, barely audible over the gale. It came from somewhere down the corridor. A child, a wounded animal. She rose and went to the door, pressing her ear to the heavy oak. The sound came again, threaded with panic. It was a woman's voice, thin and frayed with fear. Driven by an instinct deeper than reason, Anwen began to pound on the door. "Hello, is someone there?" After a moment, she heard the grumble of the guard posted outside. "Quiet in there! There is a woman in distress," Anwen called back. "Can you not hear her?" The guard was silent for a beat. "That's just the Lady Isabel. The storms frighten her. She's not right in the head. Now be quiet, Lady Isabel. Bastien's ailing mother, the woman she was to attend in the morning." The cry came again, a sound of pure, childlike terror that clawed at Anwen's heart. Her hatred for the son did not extend to the mother. No one, not even a Norman lady, should be so afraid and alone. She stopped pounding. Instead, she did the only thing she could. She began to sing. Her voice was soft at first, barely a whisper against the storm. It was an old Welsh lullaby, one her own grandmother had sung to her, the words a gentle stream of comfort and protection. She sang of the green hills sleeping under the moon, of the stars keeping watch, of the hearth fire guarding against the dark. She poured every ounce of the comfort she herself longed for into the melody, her voice growing stronger. Weaving through the cracks in the door and the howl of the wind, she sang until her throat was dry, repeating the familiar verses. And slowly, as she sang, the frantic cries from down the hall subsided, replaced by a muffled, hiccuping silence. Anwen leaned her forehead against the cold wood, her song fading into the rumble of the retreating thunder. She felt drained, but calm. She did not hear the soft footfalls outside. She did not know she had a listener. Bastien had been making his final rounds of the keep, his brow furrowed as he checked for leaks in the granary roof. The storm always worsened his mother's condition, and the anticipation of a night spent trying to soothe her ravings was a heavy weight. As he passed the corridor to the east tower, he heard it. Not his mother's cries, but a voice. A woman's voice, singing. He stopped, his hand freezing on the damp stone wall. It was a melody he had never heard, alien and beautiful, the language, the soft lyrical tongue of the Welsh. It was his prisoner's voice. For a moment, cold fury spiked in him. Was this some form of mockery, a Welsh curse sung into the heart of his home? But as he listened, the fury died, replaced by a confusion that was far more unsettling. There was no malice in the song. It was tender, soothing. It was a balm on the raw nerve of the storm. He found himself moving silently down the corridor, drawn by the sound. The guard at her door saw him and straightened, but Bastien silenced him with a sharp gesture. He stood there, in the shadowed corridor, and listened. He could hear his mother's whimpers quieting, lulled by the foreign lullaby. He closed his eyes, and for a breathtaking, terrifying moment, he did not see a political hostage or a Welsh princess. He did not see the daughter of his father's killer. He saw a young woman with chestnut curls and a soul full of music, offering comfort to a frightened old woman who was her enemy. The song ended. The only sound was the rain, now a gentle pattering on the roof. Bastien stood there for a long time, staring at the grain of the oak door that separated them. The foundations of his world, so carefully constructed from duty and vengeance, shifted again. The wildcat had not hissed or scratched. She had sung, and the sound had disarmed him more completely than any weapon could. He turned and walked away, the image of her not as a defiant captive at his table, but as a silhouette of grace against a storm, seared into his mind. The thorn he had brought into his home had, with one simple act, pricked him deeper than he ever thought possible. The morning after the storm dawned clear and cold. The sky washed a pale, brittle blue. Claremont Keep dripped with 1,000 diamonds of rainwater, and the air held a sharp, clean edge. In the east tower, Anwen was roused not by the sun, but by the turn of the key in her lock. Mistress Agnes entered, her expression, if possible, more severe than the night before. "Come, you are to attend the Lady Isabel now." There was a new, grudging note in her voice, as if she had been instructed to fetch a tool, not a person. Anwen rose, smoothing the wrinkles from her forest green gown. She had slept little, the memory of the storm and the old woman's cries lingering in her mind. She followed Agnes through a maze of stone corridors, their footsteps echoing in the hushed morning quiet. They moved from the newer, more fortified parts of the keep to an older wing, where the tapestries were faded and the air smelled faintly of dust and dried lavender. The chamber they entered was dim, the shutters only partially open. It was a room frozen in time, filled with the ghost of a life once lived. A large canopied bed dominated the space, and in it, propped on a mountain of pillows, lay Lady Isabel de Claremont. She was a wisp of a woman, her skin translucent as parchment, stretched thin over delicate bones. Her hair, once likely the same dark honey as her son's, was a cloud of silver white, but her eyes, when they fluttered open as Anwen approached, were a startling lucid blue. Agnes announced her stiffly. "My lady, this is the Welsh princess. She is to sit with you." Lady Isabel's gaze, clouded with confusion and pain, focused on Anwen. There was no fear, only a deep, weary curiosity. She did not speak French, but the common tongue of the English court. "You are the one who sang," she whispered, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. "In the storm, you sang the fear away." Anwen's breath caught. She moved closer, instinctively sinking into a curtsy not of subservience, but of respect. "I am, my lady. I am Anwen." It was a kindness. The old woman's hand, frail and veined, twitched on the coverlet. "This place, it has little kindness left in it." Anwen's eyes swept over the bedside table. It was cluttered with the paraphernalia of Norman medicine: a bleeding bowl, a jar of leeches, and several foul-smelling potions in clay vessels. She recognized the scents: opiates to induce sleep, harsh purgatives. This was not healing. It was a slow poisoning, a dulling of the senses until the end. "May I?" Anwen asked, gesturing to the remedies. Lady Isabel gave a faint nod. Anwen picked up a potion, uncorked it, and winced at the acrid smell. This is not what you need." She turned to Mistress Agnes, who watched her with open suspicion. "These potions are draining her strength. They treat the humors, but ignore the spirit. Her body is weak, but her mind is trapped by this misery." Agnes bristled. "The castle physician is a fool," Anwen stated, her voice quiet but firm. She turned back to Lady Isabel. "My grandmother taught me the old ways, the ways of the earth. We have plants that can ease pain without stealing the mind, that can strengthen the heart, not still it." Just then, a shadow fell across the doorway. Lord Bastien stood there, having approached in silence. He was clad for the day in his dark gambeson, the silver falcon stark upon his chest. His expression was unreadable, but his wintry eyes missed nothing. His mother's slightly clearer gaze, the potion in Anwen's hand, the defiance on Mistress Agnes's face. "What is happening here?" His voice was low, a rumble of warning. Agnes rushed to explain. "My lord, she insults the physician's craft. She speaks of pagan weeds." "He is killing her," Anwen interrupted, turning to face him fully. She did not flinch from his gaze. The memory of his hidden listening last night gave her a sliver of courage. "These potions bring sleep, but it is the sleep of the half-dead. They do not heal. They only wait for her to cease fighting." Bastien's jaw tightened. He looked from Anwen's earnest, passionate face to his mother's frail form. He saw the truth in it. He had watched his mother fade for a year, the physician's treatments bringing no improvement, only a gradual dimming. The song in the night had been the first spark of life he'd heard from her chamber in months. "What would you have me do?" he asked. The question directed at Anwen, a dangerous concession. "Let me tend her," Anwen said. "Give me access to the kitchen gardens, to the meadows beyond the walls. I can make a tea of chamomile and mint to calm her nerves without fogging her mind, a poultice of comfrey for the ache in her joints. There is willow bark for the pain. It is better than what you have here." The silence in the room was profound. It was a standoff between his world and hers, between Latin treatises and oral tradition, between stone and earth. "My lord." "You cannot," Agnes began. "Silence," Bastien commanded, his eyes never leaving Anwen. He was weighing her value as a hostage against the desperate hope in his mother's eyes. The hostage was a tool of war, the hope, It was something he had thought lost. "You will have an escort," he said finally, the words tasting strange. "Sir Gerald will accompany you. You may gather what you need, but know this, Lady Anwen." He stepped closer, his height and presence imposing. "If there is any trickery, any attempt to escape, or if any harm comes to my mother from your herbs, the consequences will be swift and severe. You will find the dungeon is far less comfortable than this tower." It was not trust. It was a calculated risk, a treaty born of desperation. But it was a shift. Anwen met his threat with a steady gaze. "I am a healer, Lord Bastien, not a poisoner. My word is my bond." He gave a curt nod, then turned and left, the sound of his boots fading down the hall. Anwen let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She turned back to Lady Isabel and offered a small, genuine smile. The old woman's hand moved again, this time reaching out. Anwen took it gently. It was cold and light as a bird's bone. "The green things," Lady Isabel whispered, a faint light in her blue eyes. "I miss the green things. I will bring them to you," Anwen promised, and in that moment, her captivity transformed. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was a physician, and the fortress of her enemy had just become her garden. The day settled into a new, strange rhythm. Under the watchful eyes of Sir Gerald, Anwen was allowed to forage along the wooded edges of the Claremont lands. The earth, at least, did not recognize Norman or Welsh. It yielded its chamomile, its comfrey, and its willow bark to her knowing hands with the same generosity it always had. In Lady Isabel's chamber, the change was palpable. The foul potions were banished. In their place, Anwen prepared subtle infusions that filled the room with the scent of honey and mint. She made poultices that eased the deep ache in the old woman's joints, allowing her to sit by the window for short periods, her blue eyes drinking in the sunlight. She did not miraculously heal, but the cloud of misery and confusion lifted. She began to speak more, her memories less tangled, her smiles less fleeting. It was during one of these afternoons that Bastien came to his mother's chamber. He often did, but now he lingered, a silent observer of the small miracles Anwen performed. Today, he found his mother asleep, her breathing even and quiet, one of Anwen's hands resting over hers. Anwen was reading from a book of Psalms, her voice a soft murmur. She did not stop when he entered, only glanced up and gave a slight, respectful nod before continuing. He stood by the hearth, watching her. She wore a simple gown of deep blue, her unruly chestnut curls escaping their braid to frame a face of intense concentration. She was not the defiant wildcat of the great hall, nor the sorrowful princess at the window. Here, she was in her element, capable, intelligent, and possessed of a quiet strength that seemed to fortify the very air around her. When she finished the psalm and closed the book, she looked up at him. "She will sleep peacefully for an hour or two," she said softly. "The pain is less today." Bastien found he had no sharp retort, no stern command. The words that came out were simple, stripped of their usual lordly authority. "I have not seen her so content in a long time." Anwen rose, smoothing her skirts. "It is not a cure, my lord. It is comfort. Sometimes that is the greater medicine." He was silent for a moment, his wintry gray eyes studying her. "My mother speaks of you often. She says you have the healing touch of your grandmother." A faint pink colored Anwen's cheeks. "My grandmother would say it is the earth that heals. We are merely its servants." "A humble philosophy for a princess," he remarked, though the edge in his voice was not unkind, merely curious. "It is a truthful one," she replied, meeting his gaze. "Power does not change the nature of a plant or the course of a fever. It is a lesson my people have always known, and one conquerors often forget." It was a challenge, delicately put. He could have taken offense, could have reasserted the order of things, but he did not. He simply nodded, a slow, thoughtful gesture. "Perhaps we have." He moved to the window, looking out over the bailey where his men trained. "The physician, he was recommended by the bishop himself. He has studied in Paris." "He has studied the humors of dead Greeks," Anwen said, coming to stand a few feet away from him. She did not look at him, but at the same view. "I have studied the living plants of these hills. They are different teachers. He turned his head and she felt the weight of his gaze. She risked a glance up at him. The sharp, stern lines of his face were softened in the afternoon light. The perpetual shadow of stubble on his jaw seemed less a mark of neglect and more a part of his rugged character. She saw for the first time the weariness in his eyes, the immense weight he carried not just as a lord, but as a son watching his mother fade. "Why do you do this?" he asked, his voice low. "You owe her nothing. You owe me less." The question hung between them. Anwen looked away, towards the sleeping form of Lady Isabel. "Because she is a person who is suffering," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "And I can help. That is all. It has nothing to do with you, or with being a prisoner." It was the truth, but not the whole truth. The whole truth was taking root in her heart, a treacherous, beautiful weed she dared not name. It was the way her breath caught when he entered a room, the way she found herself listening for the sound of his footsteps, the way she had begun to see not a cold conqueror, but a man bowed by duty, a man who cared for his mother with a devotion he could not express in words. She was falling in love with him. The realization was a physical blow, a sweet, sharp agony that stole her breath. It was a betrayal of her father, her brothers, her people. It was a surrender of her own pride. But as she stood there in the quiet room with him, the silence a tangible thing between them, she knew it was undeniable. He was watching her, and she feared he could see the war in her soul. His expression was unreadable, a complex map of conflicting thoughts. "My lord!" A voice broke the spell. Sir Gerald stood in the doorway, his face grim. Riders approaching from the east. Llywelyn's banner, the moment shattered. Bastien's mask of the thoughtful man vanished, replaced by the stern marcher lord. His shoulders straightened, his jaw hardened. "See her back to her chambers," he commanded Gerald, his voice once more the sound of cold authority. He strode from the room without a backward glance. Anwen's heart hammered against her ribs. Her father. He had come. It was what she had wanted, prayed for. But as she followed the stoic Sir Gerald back to the East Tower, the thought of leaving this stone keep, of leaving him, felt less like a liberation and more like a new, different kind of captivity. She had come to Claremont Keep a prisoner of war. Now she was a prisoner of her own heart.